a little video when we sat down about self-driving cars and things of the sort. The Obama administration did a lot on AI. You guys have done a lot on AI. There's a task force now focused on AI. In 2019, what's the next step for the White House, Michael?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that we're trying to share is, and trying to be, and have been pushing for the past year and a half, has been this broader focus on, as Chris discussed, this idea of industries of the future of emerging technologies. This idea that for America to ensure its leadership in technology broadly, we need to ensure that it is the home for the next great technological discoveries. And it's something that requires an emphasis on the deregulatory front, or creating a regulatory environment that allows autonomous vehicles to drive safely, allows drones to drive safely. It can allow for our greatest researchers in Silicon Valley and across the country to be able to do their important work on artificial intelligence. The second thing that we really toggle on, in addition to the regulatory factors, the issues relating to how the federal government spends its R&D dollars. We spend an incredible amount of money in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And for us to be able to plug into a system that is actually primarily private sector R&D, it's critical that we think very carefully about how we can make the most impact with the dollars that we do have. And what we ask ourselves and ask the community and talk a lot about are, what are the resources that the federal government has that the private sector and academia don't? And those are the types that we want to really focus on and leverage and push out. And whether it's our supercomputing infrastructure at some of our national labs, whether it's interesting data sets that only the government has and the private sector doesn't have access to, those are the types of questions we ask. And as we try to push the larger agenda around things like AI, we kind of toggle them into those buckets of regulatory actions. And then
are you talking now at the White House, though, about guardrails and some of this stuff, whether it's about dealing with issues of bias baked into the algorithms, whether it's dealing with some of the privacy implications, things like redlining that lots of expert groups have pointed out? Are you thinking about regulatory solutions to some of those issues?
So I think trust in these technologies is absolutely critical. The American people need to believe that the technologies that they're dealing with and working with are ones that they actually trust. And I think there's a couple of toggles we can think of, and one that I think is really interesting. The greatest, or the biggest spend in explainability, AI explainability research in the world was made by DARPA.
And that's AI that can explain why it made the decision it made.
Exactly. So a lot of times there's a lot of debate about whether or not how does an AI get to the conclusion that it does, and being able to better understand how that conclusion is drawn is something that can help inform the way that policymakers think about how that technology can integrate into an existing regulatory framework.
So then is the solution for the U.S. government to show up and drop tens of billions of dollars like the Chinese are doing? I mean, that's the thing that we hear the most from folks in the administration and outside, is that China is outpacing or threatens to outpace the U.S. in AI. Should the U.S. government spend that much money too?
Well, I think the federal government spends a lot of money on this area, and I think the one thing we'll point to is something that the federal government has prioritized. So in the president's budget that was submitted to Congress last year, we specifically called out AI as an R&D priority. This was something called out by the president to Congress. So our commitment to allocating federal R&D dollars to it is pretty obvious. I think that being said, I think the next step is coordinating that R&D, and I think we're in a very unique model where we don't have a Ministry of Science. We have folks at DARPA working on it. We have folks at the National Science Foundation, at Department of Energy working on it. And that's why we created the Select Committee on Artificial Intelligence. It really brought together the most important and most senior R&D leaders from across the government to help coordinate that effort in a way that we can get the maximum return for the dollars we do spend.